Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, host for the show. And today's guest is Ben Freakley. He's the CEO of Ready, Set, Resilience. Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself and what this means, CEO of Ready, Set, Resilient.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Ben Freakley. I'm really on a mission to help performers, particularly coaches, athletes, executives, live the most resilient version of themselves. Thus the name Ready, Set, Resilient. I was playing around with this idea when I was a college coach myself and starting my journey in sport and performance psychology at Georgia Southern University. Go Eagles! And it was during that time that that name really stuck with me. Ready is indicative of all pre-performance routines, everything that we need to do as a coach, as an athlete, as a leader to really take on the day or the moment that is in front of us. Set is short for mindset. How can we develop a mindset that is present and very goal and values oriented, and also that different mindsets for different moments, i.e., after performance, how can we shift quickly to a reflective mindset? Thinking about like what worked well, what didn't. All kind of elements of best practices and reflection, and then resilient can really be the byproduct of these things. The more time we spend focusing on preparation and elite routines, and the more time we think about, what do I want my mindset, worldview, schema to be, the more likely I am to shrink that response time down between failure and being back to in the moment, ready to get on with it, action oriented, etc. So that was kind of a side hustle since about 2010. More recently, I've taken that into a full-time company. I've got a great teammate in Dr. Tyler McDaniel, who was in my master's cohort at Georgia Southern. Then he went on to do his doctoral training at South Carolina. And he and I are really just in the process of working with various businesses, college teams, pro sport teams to do some of the things that I just mentioned right there.
So what are the practicalities of what you do? How does it work? Do you go in? Do you do workshops? Is it a season-long thing? Is it online training? How do you actually work with teams and individuals?
So all the above. We have a client that's in the MLS, Major League Soccer. That work is probably most robust in terms of actually being in person. I will go in with that team for about a week a month. Most of that work, Tim, is highly individualized. Like that athlete that's performing a couple times a week in front of as much as 65,000 people, that has their own performance to worry about, not to mention, hey, is this a contract year for me? Maybe that athlete is transitioning to the United States. So there are some, social, cultural factors to consider. So most of my work with this MLS team is highly individualized. Sometimes there will be more some team dynamics focused sessions with the whole team. Some of my time is spent working with the coaching staff, maybe just informally engaging on environmental factors that I see going on in the day-to-day training environment, in halftime talks, in post-game talks. And then on game day, part of my services include what we call a mental activation session. And this is, I'm a big fan of the self-determination theory. So autonomy is, something that I think is really important in our individual journeys. So All of this stuff is opt-in with me. The club will provide these services, but I'm very clear that there is no mandate that you have to work with Ben on your mental game. And I think that's through some really good lessons that I learned in previous work when I worked with the Toronto Blue Jays for 5 years, and like, how do we go about this work as a mental skills coach? So that's a couple teams that I work with, Tim. I have season long contracts with a 10-month season, or all the way through playoffs or a championship. Some of the college programs that I work with, I may come in for 2 or 3 days and do like workshops, like you mentioned, maybe a mental skills workshop on how to get better at self-regulating your attention and your emotion, and teaching some mental skills, helping athletes experience some mental skills like mindfulness, like some breath work, taking them through actual goal setting practices, and helping develop maybe a season long plan on how they can check in with things. And then when I'm not doing those in-person things, it's typically 5 or 6 one-on-one calls from my home office here with athletes or other performers, just about maybe live coaching, showing up and asking the question, "What would you like to focus in on today?" and seeing where the conversation goes.
If you're working with a big team, especially professional teams, a lot of times they will have somebody like a sports psychologist on staff. If that's the case, how do you negotiate or work within their remit, their job description, knowing that there's so much crossover between performance coaching and really sports psychology, which is also performance coaching?
Sure.
How do you navigate that?
Well, that is my job with the clubs. So my master's and doctoral work was in sport and performance psychology. So
So
any
you're the guy, they don't have somebody else on staff?
yeah, with those teams, I'm the
Got
guy
it.
doing that. Now, where that question really fits maybe more is if things are more of a clinical nature. What
Mm,
does that crossover look like? And
mm,
thankfully, when I was full time with the Toronto Blue Jays, we had one person fully dedicated to doing the clinical work.
mm,
Um, with these clubs that I'm working with, part of my job is to um, have relationships with people that can do the clinical work, and be ready when referrals are needed for things that are not performance related, more clinical in nature. But if we're not careful, those things can bleed into one another. So making sure that there is a referral system, and that athletes know what that looks like, and knowing that can be part of my role as well, in terms of being an advocate and supporting them if they need help beyond what I can provide.
mm. I'd like to know, we're going to get into the topics of performance, sports performance, but I'd like to know really from a business side. I'm sure there are people out there who are maybe interested in following in your footsteps to some extent of developing relationships with teams and working with teams in a private practice. We see it more and more. How do you start that? How do you find clients? Is it word of mouth? Is it through social media marketing? Is it through just contacting coaches? Where do you get your business?
Well, you ask yourself that question every day. Where do you get your business? Or you ask, am I gonna
Right,
get any business? And so then you have to, you know, use the skills that you teach to others in terms of being able to self-regulate. And
right.
hey, you're
I mean,
worried.
it's a pressured job, right?
It
Given that
pays.
you work for yourself, and so if you don't do a good job, you don't have clients.
Yep.
So I can see there's definitely some high pressure, some stress involved in that.
You nailed it. And I'd say another one, Tim, as well, as for me, there's the pressure of who is my client. By nature, and I think because I spent so long as a college coach before transitioning into doing sports psychology work, I'm comfortable reaching out to colleges, teams, sports. I'm also mindful of when I've had experiences working with lawyers or military population or business executives, they stress, pressure, performance, that's ubiquitous. None of us are immune to, some of these internal covert challenges that athletes and coaches experience. So part of the challenge in the job uh, is noticing when I'm trying to be a mile wide and an inch deep, go after this, go after that, versus getting really clear on, who do I want to serve and who do I want to support, and, what types of collaborations would be really rewarding on both ends, partnership and relationship. Most of that right now has me spending time with sports teams. Um, and I'm asking myself, where else could this make sense? I've been brought in to do keynotes with lawyers. That's a very high stress, high pressure, high demand job. That's been something that's uh, worked in the past, and you nailed it though. I would say going after the work is primarily word of mouth right now, which always reminds me that any opportunity that I get, it is my job to absolutely go in and over deliver. And so I'm constantly thinking about who should I go after and where can I find work, but also getting tighter on what that process is. So for example, if you're um, that gatekeeper or head coach of a college team and we want to work together, step one for me is a discovery call. I'll get on and say, Tim, tell me about your team. And that usually just that one question will allow us to go. Then we'll start talking about certain players, or we'll start talking about recruiting, or we'll start talking about a staff. And then from there, I will design a survey that I'll collaborate with the coaching staff on and send that out to all the athletes. And then what I'll do is I'll use information from that survey. I'll ask questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pressure do you experience as an athlete? Or more open-ended, what are the most significant challenges you face as a coach or as an athlete? So I'll use that information to start to formulate the workshops, the interventions, et cetera. And then I'm using real-time in-house context-specific information when I go in and work with that team. One of my favorite questions to ask teams is, what do you want your opponents to say it's like to play against you? And so then that type of open-ended question can help get at, well, behaviorally, what are we doing, or what could we be doing more of? And then on the back end, I am I'm following up after all of these sessions. The last part of my process is sending a report out to all the coaches. Hey, here's all the data from our surveys. Here's the sessions that we did. Based on my time with your program, here are some of my recommendations, as a coaching staff of things that we could do to keep this work going. So I know that was maybe more than you asked in the first place, but
no, it's fantastic. The more details, the better, to be honest, because if somebody is looking to do this, they need to have an idea of how this process works. The interesting thing, and we talked about this on the phone a few weeks ago, the interesting thing with working with groups of people or even individuals is you do this discovery conversation, but a lot of times coaches or players will come in and expect you to give them some magic pill that fixes their problems in a 2-hour workshop. And now we're good. Now we know how to goal set, or now we know how to control our breathing, or this is how we use imagery. Yet the reality is that this is a relationship-based environment where the more we interact with those people, the more we get to know them, the more we're able to help them. How do you transfer from hey, I did a workshop. That was great. Thanks, Ben. Good job. Maybe we'll get you in next year, to no, we want you part of this program over the long term. We want you to work with our team or our coaches on a monthly basis. How do you transition from one to the other? Because you've done it. You're working regularly with an MLS team. That shows it can happen. Is it really the recognition of maybe coaches and administration that this is valuable and we need to stick with this? You tell me.
No, that I love the question. I think that's part of anybody's job doing this work, is to do this needs analysis like you're talking about. I think right now I'm very fortunate, and that I can be a little bit more selective in who I partner with. I am more interested right now in what you just said, Tim, that when I'm doing these discovery calls or talking with these gatekeepers, I'm trying to understand the needs. And if it's a one and done type thing, I take those on from time to time. I'm a business. I have a wife and 2 kids, and I like, being able to support and provide. But then I think it goes deeper, and really looking exactly what you just said about relationship. And so what's going to happen there? You're probably not, and this is how I approached it with this MLS team when I had my first interview with them. I kind of told them, I said, these first couple months and visits, it might not look like I'm doing any work. It's not going to be come to this 20-minute presentation or come to this workshop. The most important thing right now is going to be building trust and building rapport. I'm playing the long game here. If we're really looking to support the needs of these athletes, if we're looking to make this more than a win at all cost environment, then we're going to have to really work hard on making these athletes know, hey, working with Ben, vulnerability is okay. This is a safe place. Stephen Rolnick, one of the founders of motivational interviewing, talks about being this warm fire, where you're approachable and people can come to you. The challenge in doing this work is, if you're being brought
Well, it looks like we lost Ben for a second. Let's go to our commercial. We'll be back in just a minute. The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring. All of our classes have the word coach or coaching in them, and they're taught by coaches for coaches.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills, even some of the mental performance behind what it goes into being an athlete. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. So I thought joining this master's program would help me learn different ways to attack my job. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
All right, we're back, everybody. Ben Freakley talking about being a performance coach with a variety of individuals and teams. Ben, when we talk about performance coaching, you talked about the relationships and the long-term commitment. Do you work with coaches? Do you work in the same way as you do with athletes in developing that relationship and extending that long-term commitment to essentially mentor and advise coaches?
Yes. Tim, I don't know if you're probably very familiar with the NCAA well-being study that just got released, but having been a former college coach, head coach, and assistant coach, who's supporting the coaches? And
I agree. It's a huge issue and one that really isn't talked about. We see a lot of resources given to athletes, whether it be professional or college, even high school, to some extent, less so, where the athletes are taken care of. The athletes are provided with a number of staff to support them. But then it comes to the coaches, and the assumption sometimes I feel is that coaches have it figured out now. And you and I both know, having coached, having worked with coaches, we don't have it figured out. We need help just as much as they do.
You got it. And I think the neat part of this for me, Tim, is when you're invited, those, maybe this is a little bit different way that I look at it. So I think it may feel more comfortable or natural. You bring in a mental performance coach, sports psychology coach like myself, an athlete, might come to that and say, well, I need that resource. I want to improve the mental part of my game. A coach, you have got to be invited in to that. Yeah, I love the phrase, people have to want to be coached. And I've been a coach. I know how controlling I was of my environment. I know how tough it is to have too many voices in the locker room, so to speak, too many voices surrounding that athlete. As a former coach, I wanted my messages to be the loudest messages. And I honor that with any environment that I go into. I'm very, very mindful that I am a guest in their world. And trust me, there's parts of me, that when I see things going on, I want to maybe jump in there and pass on observations. I think this is a very, very slow play to be able to be invited in where that head coach or that assistant coach really sees you as somebody that can be a resource for them, where they feel comfortable. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, how do you convince them of that when we live in a world of win now, succeed now, show me a difference right now, and we're hesitant to pay you long term?
Yeah, I don't try and convince them. I believe in kind of rolling with resistance, where I would honor that skepticism. I wouldn't. I think the harder, if somebody were to push hard on me, I could see myself as a coach really think of all the reasons that I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, what I've used is there are some coaches when they reach out to me. So for example, I probably have 5 Division I head coaches right now that I coach across the country. They've all come to me. Those were all either personal relationships or word of mouth. There's no convincing needed. They're looking at themselves. They're looking at their team. They're saying, Ben, I'd like some coach development in this. The others, in the other environments that I work with, those are ones where I'm maybe primarily brought in to serve the athletes, but along the way, am just really mindful of whose environment it is. I'm constantly checking in with the coach to get assurances and get permissions, maybe get some feedback of things. And then occasionally I might say, would you mind if I passed on some observations? If I feel it's safe to do so, if I feel the timing's right, because there are so many competing demands. And Tim, that is usually received somewhat open. And then the other thing too, I really think coaches like things that are informal. If it's too scripted, if it's too academic, especially if it's too preachy and they're feeling like you don't understand the context, the environment, my demands, I think they're going to wall up. I think they're going to create distance. And I think it can be harder to regain that trust. I think it's infrequent. I think it's, being able to go along with the banter that goes along in sporting cultures and environments. And then again, needs supportive. And once you're invited in a couple times, if you can add some value in those moments and really see the values proposition for what the problems that they're trying to solve, if they see you as a support of that, I think you're in.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch to a little bit more about what you actually do rather than the business side in relation to, let's talk about athletes. What are some of the things that you see are consistent challenges for athletes that you work with over the course of multiple sports ages? And are there trends where, athletes in general, they really need support here?
Yeah. I think dwelling over past performances, really ruminating on mistakes that may have been costly. That's one. Navigating, especially in pro sports, navigating the athlete-coach relationship. And I'm saying it in that order because I find athletes that, hey, really not happy with my status on the team. Ben, do I just put my head down, soldier on, be a pro? Can I approach my coach? Can I go to my coach and just be vulnerable, have a conversation on my performance, my development? A third trend for sure is worry about the future, especially that player who's on a contract year. I love it here. I love
Isn't it interesting? Sorry to interrupt you because I don't want to lose my train of thought. Isn't it interesting that the two of the three that you talked about focus on not being in the present?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Focus on the past, focus on the future, forget what you're doing right now.
Yeah. You could probably lump all of them into that, Tim. And going back to interventions, when I do these mental activation sessions with teams, 90% of that is really focused on landing in the moment. Give yourself permission to be right here. There's only 2 times in life, right now and too late. And all these other things will work themselves out. But for these next 90 minutes or 4 quarters or 1/2 or 9 innings, what would it look like if you brought all of yourself to the moment? So being mindful is certainly top of the list.
I'm just taking notes, Ben. That's some gold right there. Now let's talk about coaches, because this is obviously, we focus primarily on coaches. What are you seeing the needs of coaches are in today's environment?
Man, I don't know if I can prioritize them, so I'll spit them out. Then maybe we can rank them, because I know you're so invested in this, which is really what drew me to wanting to collaborate with you in the first place. One is moving from a coach-centered environment to a person-centered environment. I ask a lot of coaches all the time, hey, who grew up being coached by somebody that was really directive, really not really interested in maybe taking on players' perspectives, but this is it. Autocratic for sure. And so if most of our experiences that were modeled to us were this is the way, and especially if that way got results, you cannot fault coaches for adopting some of these things. So, let's call that a coach-centered environment, and then, we could unpack later on, or maybe another session, what it would look like to be in an athlete or person-centered environment. 2 is, how do you actually live your philosophy, if you even have one, right? I don't think you can be in your space or my space without knowing all about John Wooden's approach to leading his team and coaching his team, and really over communicating, over emphasizing, prepare, do one's best, do one's best, do one's best. And also having this robust list of the core values and principles that are going to get us there in form of, the pyramid of success. I know early on as a coach, I knew I wanted to win, right? I knew that, but my process, my priorities, being at the coal face of pressure and performance and right at the center of that ecosystem, I didn't know how to regulate myself. And again, going back to this question, Tim, of who's supporting the coaches, who's right there with them to help them explore what defines you beyond winning. How do you define success? What do you want it to be like to be coached by you? I think all these types of questions around philosophy, around values can help the coach be consistent. Like gripes that I hear from athletes, I'm not clear on what my coach wants. My coach, is inconsistent. I've never met a coach that's doing that on purpose. I've never met a coach that's intentionally doing that. Coaches are people. They also can get out of the present moment. They also can worry about not performing well. They can experience doubt. I lived all of those things. So I think it's helping coaches move from coach-centered to maybe athlete-centered and person-centered. And that's going to be underpinned by new and different ways of communicating. I think Stephen Rolnick's work on motivational interviewing is, if I had a redo moment as a coach, that's a well I'd like to dig deep. I think second is, again, clear on philosophy and values and how, what would those coaching behaviors look like? 3, it is helping coaches understand the differences between ego and mastery environments. I just, the more I've learned about these things in my sports psych journey, I'm just thinking, man, if I had do-over moments as a college coach, what could I have done for my players? Right. And just these environmental factors that may have less to do with the coach and more to do with the environment that they're looking to set up. Those are probably
they're huge.
3
they're
big
huge.
ones.
Yeah. And I think all of them are valid and important. The values one for me is where we start, right? Where we start. It is, and I had a conversation with a coach yesterday on this topic of, if you create values, if you have a philosophy and you create values and they're not shared with people, we're all wasting our time here. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what you say is important. If you don't have that up on the wall, if you're not talking about it, if you're not creating environments that highlight the values that you espouse, then they don't know and they don't care. They hold you accountable as a coach. You can have values for your team that you hold them accountable to, but you can also have values for you that they hold you accountable to.
I love that.
So this is a relationship of, hey, coach, you said you'd be organized. Look, it's on the wall. You don't even have the equipment out. Yeah, you got me. You're right. That's my bad. I'm going to work on that to fix that. Because again, we're showing vulnerability, right? We're showing that as coaches, we err, but we're also trying to hold ourselves to a higher standard. But if we just hide it, then we can do whatever we want. And I'm coach. How dare you? Right. Don't you tell me what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And this then becomes the trust issue, where I can't trust coach because, as you said, inconsistency of what is important, how we do things, etc. So I think values really starts everything. If we have our philosophy, if we have our values, if we live them, if we tell others about them, that then leads to growth in other areas. My first conversation I have with coaches, and Ben, I've gone to major clinics with major coaches, and one thing I've started to do in large groups is I will have an anonymous question go up on the slides. And, they text their answer and all that. And one of the questions that I frequently ask when I'm talking about culture is, do you have values and can your athletes articulate what they are?
Mm-hmm.
All the time, sometimes a little bit. And then that last one, what are core values? Guess which one comes up most often? And what are core values? Because nobody has taught the coaches any of this. So I think there's a huge challenge that if we want to better our athletes, a lot of times we need to better the coach. Because we can work with the athletes and they can have, you can be working with them and they're getting better within their own world. But there's that tension with the coach who maybe doesn't support what the athlete's trying to do, or they don't see it in their leader. And as a consequence, there becomes that maybe distrust, frustration of I'm trying to better myself. You're always telling me to better myself, but look at you. And I'm going to get off my soapbox now because this is your show, not mine. But it is so important, I think, to have these values, articulate them, and then do your best to live by them in an environment where you're not going to do it right all the time. So don't expect your athletes to live up to your values right all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a great place to start. And you can, thinking back to my coaching days, young coach, if I were given the chance to go to session A, how to teach your team to play a 4-4-2 high pressure system, session B, develop your values, I'm going to A.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, well, this one's going to help me win. And that one, I'll worry about that one later, right? I did my master's thesis on Division I men's soccer coaches' perceptions on leadership. And, one of the questions that I asked him was, hey, what's more important, accomplishing tasks and achieving goals, or developing and maintaining strong interpersonal relationships? The coaches that have been doing it for around 20 years or more said something like this: hey, Ben, the harder you work at developing and maintaining strong interpersonal relationships, the more people want to help you accomplish tasks and achieve goals. Yeah. And that has stuck with me, ever since concluding that study. Tim, my dissertation was on acceptance and commitment therapy, or in non-clinical settings, acceptance and commitment training. One of the core processes in ACT is values. I mean, if somebody is stuck in life, they're unsure, if they're having a hard time getting some momentum, figuring out who they are, what they want, our values can be our lighthouse in the storm. And I mean, I'm constantly thinking to myself, we spend a lot of time as coaches, we will, do video review and we will analyze tactically, were we the team that we went out to be tonight? And how can we get better at these values debriefs as well? Having some trusted resources in our life that know us well. When you say to me, Ben, loyalty is one of my values, or persistence is one of my values, and I can say to you, Tim, what would that look like in action after a loss? What would that look like after a 3-game winning streak? These conversations, I think they promote stability in the team environment. Wow, Tim's going to live his values, no matter what. And when we are so outcome focused, guilty, I've been there, I think that can lead to instability. And I've talked to athletes about this. What's it like to get the same coach every day? Awesome. What's it like when you have to check with your teammates first on the mood, coach? And when coaches can have some sort of routine, I didn't when I was early on in my coaching career. I had no routine to help me self-regulate and zoom out, asking who do I want to be in all of this? And I can only ask, what would it have been like for those that I led? If part of my process before going into a training session, before walking into a locker room team meeting or individual player meeting. Who do I want to be? And I love the question, are my behaviors aligned with my goals and values? I think that can kind of somewhat be a North Star type question, to go about day by day. And coaches are just under so much pressure, right? So much. And whether they have supports like myself or you, or if you can just help them build systems that allow them to better self-regulate, the team wins.
Yeah, before I became a professor, I was a school teacher, and I had to go through, this was in England, technically Wales at the time. I had to go through a year of teacher training where I went into schools for an entire year under observation and supervision. And one of my supervisors once told me, and I've never forgot it, she said, teachers are the best actors. Okay, well, here's why. You have to go into that classroom and you have to perform in front of those students without bringing in everything that's going on in the tornado of your life. And I remembered that when I went in, stuff's going on, things aren't working out, I'm frustrated, whatever. Hey, kids, how's it going? What a great day. Because I can't deflect or reflect that onto them. Deflect. The same thing goes for coaches. And you talked about it in just, hey, how is the mood of coach today? Coach's mood should be the act, whether it is they're having a great day or they're having a bad day. Let's be consistent with our athletes so that they hopefully consistently positive and energetic rather than the opposite. But you can't bring in the drama of your contract negotiation or the pressure that you're losing right now and everybody knows it and everybody said everything in the media about you. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to bring that onto the training field or pitch or pool or wherever you are. It is about the athletes. Mm-hmm. And you have to be an actor or actress in order to ensure that those athletes get the same you every time. And I think a lot of coaches don't do that very well.
Hmm. Yeah, I wrote down that I've been taking some notes on some of your quotes. I've found them helpful, and it can be a lot to be able to filter out what doesn't serve us in the moment. Those mm-hmm. things are real. These am I going to keep this contract? Am I going to feed my family? What's going to happen to me? Those are real concerns. And you're right. It takes one's ability to really self-regulate and become that actor. I think the thing that I maybe not wrestle with, but think about there is it an act if they're able to quickly, if those values are authentic to them, if they're zooming out and saying, who do I want to be in this world? And, optimism is on that list. Commitment is on that list. Patience is on that list. Then, to live that, even when the emotions aren't aligned with it, we get better at what we practice. Sure. And so if we continue to practice, these are my values, this is what it will look like. That's how we get to some of that stability. And there's a mindfulness exercise that I do with a lot of performers, and I call it the apps on the phone. And everybody gets the iPhone reference. Everybody gets what happens when too many apps are left open. It drains the battery. It kills the memory. And so getting performers, if we called one app the "What About My Contract" app, I could ask a coach hey, before this team talk, how about we swipe up? We can always open up that app after the game or after the season, but right now it's not going to serve you. If as you're trying to address your team, you're putting a lot of attention to the what if, that team talk's going to come out very different. Even if you don't name the app that's open, they won't get your best. And so I think there are things that exercises and practices that we can do to help us remember that these tough times are temporary. They're like the weather, it comes and it goes. But these values and goals, those things can be highly stabilizing when we put time and effort into answering those big questions.
And you also went back to being in the present, not thinking about the future, being in the present. Well said. Well, Ben, I want to be thoughtful of your time. If you have any particular advice for coaches, we get a lot of coaches who are currently coaching and also those who are maybe looking to get into coaching on this show, watching the show, listening to the podcast. What final thoughts do you have for them?
One's be yourself. There's going to be, the longer you're in the journey, the more people will suggest and offer ways that you can change to get better. Certainly be open to that. We're giving feedback constantly to our players, and it looks great when we can model that we're open to it as well. Mm-hmm. And in that same breath, remember who you are, what got you into that seat, the strengths that you possess as a human. 2, have a tribe, have a network, have people that have context of the work that you do, that you can really be vulnerable with and share what it's like to be in your shoes. And then nerd out on sports psychology. I wish I started out that journey early. I was so focused on tactics and technique. Mm-hmm. But to be able to connect deeply with the people that you lead can be your competitive advantage.
Great advice. Great advice. Yeah, I had a coach recently tell me, he said, I think about quitting at least once a year, sometimes more. But then I remember my why and what I'm doing it for. And that keeps me going. So yeah, great advice. Thank you. Last question is, if somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe in future, listening to the podcast, watching the show, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just shoot me an email, bencfrakley@gmail.com, or my website, rsrcoaching.com.
Awesome. And for those of you listening to the podcast, that's bencfrakley@gmail.com. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. And just a reminder, everybody, that we try to do these once every week or two. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to so that you can stay informed with these guests. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and Ben Freakley, thanks so much for watching.
Thanks, Tim.